Leora sat in the cold, dark cell, her body chained to the stone wall. The sharp edges of the chains cut into her skin, but it was the weight of despair that hurt the most. She was a prisoner not just of these chains, but of the thoughts that filled her mind. For months, perhaps even years, she had been held by the Zur, a powerful alien empire that saw her kind as nothing more than a tool to be used. To them, she was worthless, a trophy, a symbol of their power over weaker species. Her race, the Lirael, was known for their beauty, intelligence, and grace, but none of that mattered to the Zir. To them, Leora was just another prisoner in their endless war for dominance. Her family, once proud rulers of their home world, had been overthrown by the Zir. They had taken her, stripped her of her royal status, and forced her into this prison. She no longer wore the robes of a queen, no longer carried the crown of her people. Now, she wore the rags of a prisoner, shackled in a cell that was barely more than a cage. The silence of the cell was broken only by the occasional sound of footsteps echoing outside. But no one ever came to speak to her, not in a way that mattered. The Zir guards watched her, but they were cruel and uninterested in her pain. They saw her as nothing. And as the days passed, Leora began to believe it. Her strength was fading. The hope she once had was slowly being smothered by the cold, the hunger, and the endless days of isolation. She had been treated like an object, like a tool to be used in the Zir's endless quest for control. Her captors never asked her for anything other than submission. They didn't care about her thoughts, her dreams, or her past. To them, she was just a prisoner, a symbol of their victory over the Lirael. But deep inside, there was still a part of Leora that refused to be broken. Even now, in the darkest corners of her mind, there was a spark of defiance. She wasn't sure if it was the memory of her home or the image of her people that kept her from completely succumbing to despair. But it was something, and it was all she had left. She clung to it. For what felt like an eternity, she had waited. She didn't know for what. Perhaps for a miracle, or perhaps for someone who would see her as more than just a prisoner. But in the cold, dark silence of her cell, she had all but given up on the idea that anyone would ever come to rescue her. Until one day, something changed. It started with the faint sound of footsteps. Unlike the heavy, echoing steps of the Zir guards, these steps were lighter, faster. They moved with purpose, and they stopped in front of her cell. Leora's heart skipped a beat, and she looked up, her eyes squinting in the dim light. She saw a shadow standing in the doorway. It was different from the guards. That much was clear. But who was it? The figure moved closer, and Leora's breath caught in her throat as the figure stepped into the dim light. A human. A man. Leora's mind raced. A human? What was he doing here? The Zir had always been clear. Humans were beneath them. They had no interest in human affairs. Yet here was this human standing before her, looking at her with a gaze that was full of pity? No, not pity. There was something else in his eyes. Something that spoke of determination, strength, and perhaps even kindness? Leora's first instinct was to retreat into the shadows, to shrink away from the stranger. She had been so used to being ignored, to being treated as nothing more than a thing to be used, that the thought of someone, especially a human, taking an interest in her felt impossible. But before she could retreat, the human spoke. "You're not worthless," he said, his voice soft but firm. Leora's eyes widened. The words struck her like a lightning bolt. They were so simple, yet they carried a weight she hadn't felt in so long. Worthless. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever told her she wasn't worthless. Not the Zir. Not even her own people, who had abandoned her in their defeat. But this human, he saw her. He saw something in her that none of her captors had ever bothered to look for. "I know you're in pain," he continued, "but you're more than this. You're not just a prisoner." Leora blinked, unsure if she could trust her ears. Who are you?" she asked, her voice raspy from days without speaking. "My name is Caden," the human said, stepping closer, "and I'm here to help you." Leora's mind spun. Help her? How? No one had ever helped her before. She had been discarded, left to rot in this cell, alone and forgotten. And yet, here he was, offering her something that felt like hope. The idea seemed impossible, but his words, his presence, were enough to stir something deep inside her. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you help me?" Caden paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "Because I believe in freedom, and you deserve to be free." Leora stared at him, the words hanging in the air. She didn't know what to think. Was it possible? Could this human really be offering her a way out? For the first time in what felt like forever, Leora allowed herself to hope. A small, fragile hope, but hope nonetheless. She didn't know what would happen next, or if Caden was truly trustworthy, but in this moment, she believed. For the first time in so long, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't worthless after all. Caden reached down and gently touched the chains that bound her. "We'll get you out of here," he said, his voice steady. "You're not alone anymore." And in that moment, Leora made a silent vow. No matter what happened next, she would fight with everything she had to regain her freedom, to reclaim her life, and to show the Zir that they had underestimated her. They had made a mistake when they thought she was nothing, because she wasn't nothing. She was something. She was someone, and she was about to be free. Leora stared at Caden, unable to fully grasp what was happening. A human, standing before her, offering her a chance at freedom. For so long, she had lived in darkness and despair, trapped in this cold, lonely cell. The idea of freedom seemed like a distant dream, something that happened to others but not to her. Yet this human had come. He had stepped into her life, offering a way out. But could she trust him? Could she really believe that this man would keep his word? After all, she had been betrayed so many times before. Caden seemed to sense her hesitation. He gave her a reassuring smile, his eyes warm with a kindness she had almost forgotten existed. "You don't have to decide now," he said. "I'm not here to force you. I'm here to help you. But the choice is yours." Leora's heart raced as she thought about the situation. What was her life like now, anyway? Days spent in this tiny, cold cell, alone with nothing but her own thoughts. The days stretched on endlessly, each one just like the last. She had once been a princess, a symbol of power and grace. But now, she was a prisoner, a forgotten thing. No, not even that. She was less than that. The Zir treated her like a broken toy, discarded and useless. But Caden's words were different. He didn't see her as a worthless thing. He saw her as a person, a being worth saving. And for the first time in so long, Leora felt a flicker of hope. "I don't know if I can trust you," Leora whispered, looking down at the chains that bound her wrists. They were a constant reminder of how powerless she had become. "How do I know you won't just leave me here when it gets hard?" Caden stepped closer, lowering his voice to a calm, steady tone. "Because I don't make promises I can't keep. I've fought for people before, people who couldn't fight for themselves. I'm not leaving until you're free." His words struck something deep inside her. There was something about the way he spoke, something in his voice that made her believe him. She wasn't sure what it was, but there was no doubt in her mind that he meant every word. Caden knelt beside her, taking a small device from his belt. "These chains," he said, "they won't be a problem for long." Leora flinched as he reached toward her, but she didn't pull away. She had nothing left to lose. If he could get her out of here, she would follow him anywhere. Her hands were trembling, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the excitement of what might come next. Caden activated the device, and the chains around her wrists began to glow softly. With a quick motion, the chains snapped open, falling to the floor with a dull clang. Leora blinked, looking at her now free wrists. It was the first time in months that she had felt the full weight of her own arms. The feeling was both strange and exhilarating. Caden helped her to her feet, his grip firm but gentle. "You're free now," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "But we're not out of here yet. We've still got a long way to go." Leora's legs wobbled beneath her as she stood, her body weak from the long months of captivity. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, and for a moment she feared she might collapse. But Caden was there, steadying her with his hand. "Easy, now," he said softly, guiding her towards the small, hidden passageway he had come through. "You've been in this cell for far too long. Let's get you somewhere safe." Leora's mind was still reeling, but she nodded. Safe. The word felt foreign, like something she hadn't known in a lifetime. But if this human could give her that, she would hold on to it with everything she had. They moved through the corridors of the prison, their footsteps echoing softly in the silence. Leora's heart raced with every turn. There were guards patrolling, and every time they passed, she held her breath, hoping they wouldn't notice her. But Caden was quick and careful, and somehow they slipped past without being seen. As they neared the exit, Leora's excitement grew. She could almost taste the freedom on the air. But with every step, the fear began to creep back. What would happen if they were caught? What would happen to her if they failed? Caden seemed to sense her unease. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're almost there. Just stay close to me." Leora nodded, feeling a strange sense of comfort in his words. She didn't know if it was because she was finally free or because of the man who had come to her rescue, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real hope. The kind that made her believe she could survive this. They reached a small, hidden ship at the back of the prison complex. It was an unassuming craft, barely big enough for the two of them, but it was enough. Caden led her inside, helping her into the seat and securing her in place. The ship hummed, too, life as Caden activated the controls. The engine roared to life and they began to ascend, leaving the prison planet behind. Leora watched as the ground below shrank, and the stars of space began to fill the view. For the first time in what felt like forever, Leora let herself relax. She was free. The shackles were gone. And as the ship soared through the stars, she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change. It had already begun to change, the moment Caden had stepped into her life. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Caden glanced over at her, a small smile on his face. "Somewhere safe, and then we figure out what comes next. Together." Leora nodded, a sense of determination growing in her chest. The journey ahead would be difficult. The Zir would not let her go without a fight. But she wasn't the same person she had been when she was a prisoner. She was free now, and nothing, not even the empire that had chained her, could take that away. For the first time, Leora allowed herself to dream again. She had a future ahead of her, and this time, she wasn't going to let anyone or anything stop her. The ship glided silently through the vast emptiness of space, leaving the prison planet far behind. Leora stared out the small window, watching the stars blur together as they moved further away from the planet that had held her captive for so long. The feeling of freedom was overwhelming, but also new and unfamiliar. She had never been free like this. As a princess, her life had been planned out, each step controlled by the rules of her people and the expectations of her royal family. Now, she was alone in a world where no one controlled her destiny except herself. Caden sat beside her, his hands steady on the controls, his face focused but calm. Leora couldn't help but wonder how someone like him had ended up in a place like this. He was different from the Zir soldiers who had guarded her cell with cold eyes and harsh words. There was kindness in Caden, a warmth that made her feel safer than she ever had before. "You're doing well," Caden said, breaking the silence as he glanced at her. "You've been through a lot, but you're strong. I can see that." Leora gave him a small, uncertain smile. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm still running from everything." Caden nodded, his eyes softening. "You're not running. You're moving forward, and you don't have to do it alone anymore." The words comforted her, though she didn't fully understand them yet. Could she really start over? Could she really leave the pain of her past behind? She had been a prisoner for so long that the idea of something different seemed almost impossible. But in the warmth of Caden's words, in the stillness of the ship, she could almost believe that there was a chance for a new life. A chance to be more than just a prisoner, more than just a victim of the Zir's cruelty. The ship jolted slightly, pulling Leora from her thoughts. Caden quickly adjusted the controls, his brow furrowing as he checked the systems. "We're not alone," he muttered, his fingers flying over the buttons. Leora's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Caden's eyes were sharp with focus. "We've been followed." Leora's stomach twisted. The Zir would never let her go without a fight. She should have known it wouldn't be this easy. But even as the fear set in, there was something else inside her, a spark of defiance. She wasn't going to go back. Not now. Not ever. How? "Long do we have?" she asked, trying to stay calm. "Not long," Caden replied. "They'll catch up with us soon. We need to make a jump, but the engines are still warming up. It'll take a few minutes." Leora's mind raced. The Zirs. Ships were fast, and they were relentless. She didn't have much time to figure out a plan. But as the ship hummed beneath her, she realized something. She didn't have to do this alone. Caden was with her, and together they could find a way out of this. She took a deep breath. "What can I do to help?" Caden looked at her, surprised. "I didn't think you'd want to get involved. You're still recovering." Leora's eyes burned with determination. "I'm not going to sit here and wait to be caught. What do you need me to do?" Caden hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, if you're sure. There's an emergency hatch at the back of the ship. It's small, but it'll get us out of here if we need to escape in a hurry. We need to make sure it's clear and ready in case we have to use it." Leora stood up, her legs still a little shaky, but steady enough to move. She walked toward the back of the ship, her mind focused on the task ahead. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She wasn't just a captive. She was a fighter now, and she would do whatever it took to stay free. As she made her way to the hatch, she heard Caden's voice calling out from the front of the ship. "Hold on, they're getting closer. Just a few more seconds." Leora reached the hatch and checked it carefully. It was small, but well hidden behind a panel. She ran her hands over the controls, making sure everything was in place. The last thing they needed was a malfunction when they were about to make their escape. "Everything looks good," she called out to Caden, her voice steady. Caden's voice crackled over the comm system. "Perfect. We're about to jump." The ship shook again, and this time it felt stronger. Leora braced herself against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. She could almost feel the Zir ship closing in on them, the heat of their pursuit pressing against her. "Ready?" Caden asked. Leora nodded. She didn't even hesitate. "Ready." Caden hit the button, and the ship's engines roared to life, the force of the jump sending a shiver through Leora's body. For a moment, everything was chaos. Lights flashing, alarms blaring. But then, as quickly as it had started, it all went quiet. The ship was still. They had made the jump. Leora looked out the window again, this time seeing only the peaceful expanse of space ahead. The Zir were no longer on their tail. They were free, for now. Caden let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. We did it. We're out of their reach, at least for a little while. Leora let herself relax, her body finally releasing the tension that had been building up. She had done it. She had helped. And for the first time, she felt like she had truly escaped. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of her mind, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. There was also a sense of triumph, of hope. Caden turned to her with a small smile. You did great. I couldn't have asked for a better partner. Leora's heart warmed at his words, and for the first time she believed them. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was more. She had strength. She had purpose. And she had Caden, someone who truly believed in her. As the ship drifted into the unknown, Leora couldn't help but wonder what would come next. The Zir wouldn't stop hunting her, but she wasn't the same person she had been before. She wasn't powerless anymore. She was free, and she would fight for her future. And this time, she wasn't running away. She was moving forward. The ship flew through the vast emptiness of space, leaving behind the memories of the prison and the chase. Leora sat in the cockpit, her eyes staring out at the stars. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the weight of the chains that had held her, both physical and emotional, begin to loosen. There was still a long way to go before she could truly be free, but for now, she was safe. Caden was busy with the ship's systems, his hands moving quickly over the controls. He had been quiet for most of the journey, but Leora could feel the tension still hanging in the air, like a storm just waiting to break. It wasn't just the danger they had left behind. It was the uncertainty of what came next. Neither of them knew what to expect. "Where are we going?" Leora asked softly, breaking the silence. She wasn't sure what answer she expected, but part of her wanted to know that there was a plan. Caden didn't immediately reply. His gaze stayed focused on the ship's dashboard as he adjusted their course. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes tired but determined. "Somewhere safe. It's not much, but it'll give us time to think." Leora nodded, though she wasn't sure what safe really meant anymore. Could she ever feel truly safe again? The Zir would never stop looking for her, and she wasn't sure if there was anywhere in the galaxy where they couldn't find her. But for now, she would trust Caden. He had already done more for her than anyone else ever had. He had given her something she had lost long ago: hope. The ship eventually landed on a small, uninhabited planet, its surface rocky and barren. There were no signs of life, no cities or structures, just open fields and mountains in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was perfect for what they needed. A place to rest, a place to recover. Caden powered down the engines and turned to "We'll stay here for a while. The Zir won't be able to track us here. We'll have some time to catch our breath." Leora stepped out of the ship, her bare feet touching the dry ground. The planet was cold, but the air was fresh and crisp. It felt different from the stale air of the prison, the air of freedom. She stood for a moment, breathing in the newness of it all. She could feel the change in the air, a shift in the way her body felt. She was alive. She was free. But more than that, she could feel something deep inside her. A fire that had been dimmed for so long was starting to spark again. Caden came up behind her, his footsteps soft on the ground. "You should rest," he said, his voice kind but firm. "You've been through a lot." Leora turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "I'm not tired. Not anymore. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her response. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, her voice steady, "I'm done running. I'm done being afraid." Caden studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's good. But even so, you still need rest. We've got a long road ahead of us." Leora didn't argue. She knew he was right. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had to do something more. She couldn't just sit here and wait. Not after everything that had happened. Later that evening, after Caden had finished checking the ship's systems, he found Leora sitting outside, staring at the sky. The stars were brilliant here, a sharp contrast to the dark, oppressive sky over the Zir prison. Leora hadn't realized how much she missed the simple beauty of the universe, the way the stars twinkled and danced in the sky, the way the planets seemed to move in perfect harmony. Caden sat beside her, his presence quiet but solid. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said after a while. Leora nodded. "It is. I never really looked at the stars before," Caden smiled. "When you're on the run, it's easy to forget what's important. But sometimes you just have to stop and remember that there's more to the world than what's right in front of you." Leora turned to him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Why did you help me? I mean, you didn't have to. You didn't even know me." Caden paused, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't have to, but I couldn't just stand by and let the Zir do what they were doing. No one should have to live the way they forced you to. And when I heard about you, about what they'd done, I knew I had to act." Leora was silent for a moment, her thoughts swirling. "You risked everything for me? I don't understand why." Caden shrugged, a slight smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Maybe it's because I believe in something. I believe that everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves to be free, to live without fear. I couldn't let that go." Leora's heart swelled with emotion. There was something about Caden, something different from anyone she had ever known. He wasn't doing this for power or glory. He wasn't even doing it for himself. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. And for the first time in so long, Leora felt a deep sense of gratitude for the man beside her. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said softly. Caden met her gaze, his expression earnest. "You would have found a way. You're stronger than you think." Leora smiled, the warmth of his words filling her heart. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe in that strength. She had spent so much time focusing on her weaknesses, on the things that had held her back. But now, in the stillness of the night, with the stars shining brightly above, she realized that she was more than her past. She was more than the chains that had bound her. She was free. The next few days passed quietly, with Caden teaching Leora the basics of navigating the ship and keeping their location secure. She was a quick learner, absorbing everything Caden taught her. But even more than that, she began to see something within herself that had been hidden for so long. A spark of hope. Hope that she could rebuild her life. Hope that she could fight back against the empire that had stolen so much from her. Leora didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer afraid. For the first time in her life, she was in control of her own destiny. And no one, not the Zir, not anyone, could take that away from her. Together with Caden, she would find a way to take back her freedom, to bring justice to those who had suffered, and to create a new life for herself, one that was not defined by her past, but by what she could become. The days on the small, quiet planet passed slowly, but each one brought Leora a step closer to her new reality. The fear that had once gripped her heart began to fade, replaced by a growing determination. She had been a prisoner for so long, but now she was free. Now she could take control of her own future. Caden kept a steady routine, teaching her how to operate the ship, maintain its systems, and keep their location hidden from any potential threats. He was patient with her, guiding her with the same calm confidence that had first drawn her to him. At first, Leora had felt out of place, unsure of herself in this new world of freedom. But with each lesson, she gained confidence. She realized that there was so much she could do. She wasn't helpless anymore. One afternoon, as they sat together on the rocky ground outside the ship, watching the sun set over the barren landscape, Leora finally spoke up. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady, "about what comes next." Caden turned to her, his eyes reflecting the soft orange glow of the setting sun. "What do you mean?" "I can't just hide forever," she said, her voice growing more certain with each word. "I can't just run. I have to do something. I have to fight back." Caden watched her carefully, sensing the shift in her resolve. He knew she had been through unimaginable pain, but he also knew that she had strength inside her. He smiled softly. "What are you thinking?" Leora stood up, her back straight and her head held high. "The Zir. They took everything from me. My family, my home, my people. I won't let them do that to anyone else. I won't let them get away with it." Caden's smile faded as he looked at her. "It won't be easy. The Zir are powerful and they'll be looking for you. They won't stop until they find you." "I know," she said, her voice calm but fierce. "But I can't just sit here and do nothing. I have a right to take back what's mine, to stop them from hurting anyone else. I won't live in fear any longer." Caden stood beside her, his gaze unwavering. "You're right. You have the right to fight. But we'll need help. We can't do it alone." Leora nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She wasn't naive. She knew that taking on the Zir Empire would require more than just her. Strength and Caden's skills. It would take a team, a movement, people willing to stand up and fight alongside them. But the idea of building a rebellion, of rallying others to their cause, felt like a spark of hope in the darkness. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice strong. "But I can't do it alone." Caden placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with conviction. "You won't be alone. We'll find others, people who have suffered just like you, and together, we'll make them listen." The next few weeks were spent in quiet preparation. Caden and Leora discussed their plans late into the night, mapping out possible strategies and thinking about where to begin. They needed allies, people who had been oppressed by the Zir, people who would understand what they were fighting for. Leora's mind raced with possibilities. She had seen the way the Zir treated their prisoners. She had seen the destruction they left in their wake. There were others out there, other races who had been enslaved, other worlds that had been devastated. If they could reach them, if they could convince them that they had a chance to rise up, they might stand a chance. One day, as they sat together in the small cockpit, Caden turned to her with a map of the galaxy in his hands. "I've been thinking about where we should start. There's a planet not far from here. It's under the Zir's control, but it's also home to a large group of refugees. They've been living in hiding for years, hoping the Zir wouldn't notice them." Leora studied the map carefully. "Do you think they'll join us?" Caden shrugged. "It's hard to say. But if we can get to them, if we can show them that they're not alone, they might be willing to fight." Leora's heart raced with anticipation. This was it. This was their first step, the first step toward something bigger. She wasn't just going to run anymore, she was going to fight, and she was going to make the Zir pay for everything they had done. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. "Let's go." The ship hummed to life as Caden set the coordinates. The journey would take several days, but Leora didn't mind. Every minute brought them closer to their goal. Every minute brought them closer to the chance to change everything. As they approached the refugee planet, Leora could feel the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about all the people who had been hurt by the Zir. This was about giving them a chance to fight back, to take control of their own lives again. The planet was a desolate place, its surface covered, in ruins and makeshift shelters. As they landed, Leora could see the signs of hardship everywhere. The people here were struggling just like she had. But there was something in their eyes, a spark of defiance that reminded her of herself. Caden helped her off the ship, and they made their way to the small settlement where the refugees lived. The people were wary at first, but Leora didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her voice strong as she addressed them. "I know what it's like to be afraid," she said. "I know what it's like to feel powerless, but I'm here to tell you that you don't have to be afraid anymore. The Zir may think they control us, but they're wrong. We have the power to fight back, and we will." The refugees listened, in silence, their faces unreadable. Leora held her breath, waiting for a response, and then, slowly, one by one, they began to nod. They began to see the hope in her words. "This is just the beginning," Caden whispered to her. "We're not alone anymore." Leora looked out at the group of refugees, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. She had taken the first step toward something bigger. And as she looked around, she knew that together they would change everything. Leora stood before the small group of refugees, her heart pounding in her chest. It had been weeks since they had gathered their first allies, and in that time, they had grown. The rebellion was no longer just a dream. It was real, and it was growing stronger every day. But there was still so much left to do. They had to move quickly if they were going to take on the Zir Empire. The refugees, many of whom had once been slaves or prisoners, had begun to train. They weren't soldiers, but they had something the Zir didn't, a reason to fight. They had something to protect, something that was worth risking everything for. And as Leora stood before them, she could feel their resolve building. They were no longer afraid. They were ready to fight. Caden stood beside her, his eyes scanning the group. "We've trained them as best we can," he said quietly, his voice steady. "Now it's time. We go after the Zir stronghold." Leora nodded, her thoughts racing. The Zir were powerful, their ships fast and their weapons deadly. But the people they had oppressed, the ones who had suffered under their rule, were ready. They had the fire of revenge burning in their hearts, and that fire was stronger than any weapon the Zir had. "We can do this," Leora said, her voice filled with conviction. She turned to face the group. "The Zir may think they've broken us. They may think they've won, but they're wrong. We've been given a chance to rise, to fight for our freedom, and we won't let them take it away." The refugees cheered, their voices full of determination. It was a sound Leora hadn't heard in so long, and it filled her with hope. They were ready. Together, they were strong. As the group gathered their weapons and prepared for the battle, ahead, Leora's mind wandered back to the prison where she had once been held. She had been nothing there, just a broken prisoner, a symbol of the Zir's cruelty. But now she was something different. She wasn't just a princess. She wasn't just a victim. She was a leader, and she had a responsibility to these people. She had to see this through, not just for herself, but for all of them. The small fleet of ships, including the one Caden had stolen to rescue her, was ready to launch. It was a ragtag group, not nearly as well equipped as the Zir's forces, but it was theirs. It was a symbol of their fight for freedom, and it was more than enough to give them hope. Caden stepped up to her as they prepared to board the ships. "You know this won't be easy, right?" he asked, his voice low. Leora met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Nothing worth fighting forever is." Caden smiled at her, a mix of pride and concern in his eyes. "I just want you to be safe. We all do." "I will be," Leora said confidently. But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us. We're fighting for our future. As they boarded the ships, the group of rebels grew quiet. They knew what was at stake. They knew the risks. But they also knew that if they didn't act now, the Zir would continue to destroy everything they loved. They couldn't let that happen. Not again. The journey to the Zir stronghold was tense. The ships flew in a tight formation, trying to avoid detection. They were still too small to take on the Zir head-on, so they had to rely on speed and strategy. Caden piloted one of the ships, while Leora sat in the cockpit of another, her eyes focused on the mission ahead. She could feel the weight of it, but she also knew that she had made the right choice. She had taken a stand, and she wasn't going to back down. As they approached the Zir stronghold, Leora's heart raced. She could see the massive space station in the distance, its sleek, dark silhouette against the stars. It was a symbol of everything they had fought against, everything they were trying to destroy. But they were no longer afraid. They had the strength, the will, and the courage to take it down. "We're in position." Caden's voice crackled over the comms. "Let's do this." Leora's hands tightened around the controls. "For freedom," she whispered to herself. With a signal, the rebels launched their attack. The Zir's defenses were formidable, but they weren't prepared for this. They had underestimated the power of a people who had nothing left to lose. The battle was intense. Ships clashed in the void of space, weapons flashing as explosions lit up the darkness. But the rebels were relentless. They fought with a fury and determination that the Zir hadn't seen before. It wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming everything they had lost. Leora's ship darted through the chaos, her heart pounding as she locked onto a target. The Zir's main weapons array came into view, and she didn't hesitate. With a steady hand, she fired. Her shot hitting the mark, the array exploded in a burst of light, sending a shockwave through the Zir forces. "We're making a dent!" Caden shouted over the comms. "Keep pushing forward!" Leora's eyes narrowed as she saw the Zir's flagship approaching. It was massive, more powerful than anything they had faced so far. But she didn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to. The Zir had taken everything from her, and now it was time to take it back. With Caden's guidance, she led the charge toward the flagship, the other rebel ships following close behind. The final showdown was near. This would decide everything. As they closed in on the flagship, Leora took a deep breath, her fingers steady on the controls. She was no longer the frightened prisoner she had once been. She was a leader, and this was her fight. This was their fight. The battle raged on, the rebels pressing forward with everything they had. The Zir were strong, but they weren't invincible. And in the end, it was the strength of the rebels, the strength of the people who refused to be controlled, that would bring the Zir to their knees. Leora watched as the Zir flagship began to fall, the lights dimming as the systems failed. They had done it. They had won. The Zir were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. The rebellion had succeeded. As the last of the Zir forces were defeated, Leora stood in the cockpit, her heart swelling with pride. The galaxy was free, and it was only the beginning. Together with Caden and the rebels, they had changed the future. The fight wasn't over, but they had proven something important. No one could break them. Not anymore. And for the first time in her life, Leora felt a peace she had never known. She was free. She was alive, and she had helped create a new world, a world where no one would ever again be treated as worthless.